I've been with the Austin Police Department for 12 years, working everything from traffic stops to major crimes. But what I discovered at the Whitmore Museum of Fine Arts on March 23, 2021, still haunts me. Sometimes the worst criminals hide behind the most respectable facades, and what we uncovered that night shattered everything I thought I knew about our city's elite. The call came in at 11:47 p.m. Silent alarm at the museum downtown. My partner Detective Sarah Chin and I were working late shift in our 2018 Ford Explorer Police Interceptor when dispatch crackled through the radio. Unit 23, we have a silent alarm activation at 1247 Riverside Drive, Whitmore Museum. Security company requests police response. Museum break-ins usually meant kids looking for thrills or desperate addicts after anything valuable to fence. Nothing that required two detectives, but we were closest to the scene and already cruising downtown Austin after wrapping up paperwork from an earlier domestic violence call. The Whitmore Museum sat on Riverside Drive, an imposing 3-story limestone building that had served Austin's cultural elite for over 60 years. As we pulled into the circular drive, our headlights swept across the manicured gardens and ornate entrance. The March night was cold and damp, with intermittent drizzle creating halos around the ornate street lamps lining the museum's facade. The building looked completely secure, no broken windows, no obvious signs of forced entry, no footprints in the wet flower beds surrounding the entrance. Chin checked her radio while I examined the main entrance doors, looking for any signs of tampering with the locks. Security company confirms the alarm came from the East Wing, Section E4, she reported, lowering her radio. They're sending a representative, but their ETA is 20 minutes. Alarm was triggered at 11:34 p.m., no visual confirmation of intruders on their monitoring system. I was photographing the entrance when headlights swept across the parking lot. A silver Mercedes E-Class sedan pulled up to the main entrance, and a well-dressed woman in her 50s stepped out, clearly flustered about being called out so late. She wore an expensive wool coat over what looked like hastily thrown-on clothes. "Officers, I'm Dr. Margaret Ashford, the museum director," she said, fumbling with a large ring of keys. "I'm so sorry you were called out here for what's probably just a system malfunction. Our security system has been acting up lately, false alarms, sensor malfunctions. The East Wing is just storage and administrative offices, nothing valuable enough to interest actual thieves." Something in her tone immediately struck me as odd. In my 12 years on the force, I'd responded to hundreds of break-in calls. Property owners were usually either terrified that someone had violated their space or angry about potential theft. Dr. Ashford seemed primarily concerned with convincing us this wasn't worth our time. Chen noticed it too, catching my eye as we followed Dr. Ashford through the main entrance. "Ma'am, even if it's a false alarm, we need to complete our inspection to clear the call. Insurance companies require documentation of police response to alarm activations." The museum's interior was dimly lit by emergency lighting, casting long shadows between the display cases filled with Greek pottery, Renaissance paintings, and contemporary sculptures. Our footsteps echoed off the polished marble floors as we made our way toward the East Wing. Dr. Ashford moved quickly, clearly familiar with the layout even in the reduced lighting. "The specific alarm trigger was in the East Corridor," Chen said, checking her notes from dispatch. "Section E4, according to your security company's alert." Dr. Ashford's step faltered slightly, just for a moment. That's just a storage area. Old exhibition materials, archived pieces, nothing that would interest criminals. Probably just a temperature sensor malfunction. The humidity controls have been problematic lately." As we entered the East Wing, I immediately noticed the difference in architecture and atmosphere. While the main gallery areas felt open and spacious, designed to welcome visitors, this section had a distinctly different character. The hallways were narrower, with more doors, and what looked like recently installed security cameras positioned at every corner and intersection. The lighting was also different, newer LED fixtures instead of the classical chandeliers in the public areas. The walls were a neutral beige rather than the warm colors used in the exhibition spaces. Everything about this section felt more institutional, more secure. "Dr. Ashford," I said, stopping at a heavy wooden door marked Private Authorized Personnel Only. This door has some impressive security hardware for a storage room. The door featured 3 separate locking mechanisms, 2 traditional deadbolts, and what appeared to be an electronic keypad system with a small digital display. The kind of multi-layered security you'd expect on a bank vault or high-security government facility, not a museum storage area. We keep some extremely valuable pieces there during transitions between exhibitions, she explained, but her voice had gotten noticeably higher and more strained. Insurance requirements, you understand. Some items are worth millions, and the insurance companies mandate specific security protocols. Chen was examining the doorframe with her flashlight when she motioned me over. Take a look at this, she whispered, pointing to fresh scratches around the electronic lock housing and the upper deadbolt. The scratches were recent bright metal showing through the dark finish, the kind you see when someone's attempted forced entry with pry bars or other tools. Dr. Ashford, it definitely looks like someone tried to get through this door, I said. We need to examine the interior to determine if anything was taken and document any damage for our report. The woman's face went visibly pale under the corridor lighting. I really don't think that's necessary, officers. The door held, obviously, so nothing could have been stolen. It's probably just damage from maintenance work last week. Ma'am, with respect, attempted burglary is still burglary under Texas law, Chen replied, her tone remaining polite but becoming more official. We need to complete our investigation and document any attempted theft for our incident report. If you could open the door so we can verify nothing was stolen and photograph any damage? Dr. Ashford stood there for nearly 30 seconds, clearly struggling with some internal decision. Her hands were shaking slightly as she finally approached the keypad, entering what appeared to be a lengthy numerical code, then using 2 different physical keys for the deadbolts. The locks disengaged with heavy metallic clicks that echoed in the narrow corridor. The door opened to reveal not a storage room, but a short hallway leading to another door, this one made of brushed steel with an even more sophisticated digital lock system. The air that flowed out was noticeably different, climate-controlled, with a slight chemical smell I recognized from high-end art conservation facilities I'd visited during previous investigations. This is quite an elaborate setup for storage, I observed, noting the pristine white walls and professional-grade lighting fixtures in the short hallway. Some pieces are extremely sensitive to environmental conditions, Dr. Ashford replied, but she was clearly reluctant to proceed further. Temperature, humidity, air quality, it all has to be precisely controlled to prevent deterioration of priceless artifacts. The second door required another complex code sequence, this one taking Dr. Ashford almost a full minute to complete. When it finally opened with a soft pneumatic hiss, we stepped into a space that took my breath away, but not for the reasons I'd expected. The room was professionally designed as a private gallery, approximately 30 feet by 20 feet, with museum-quality lighting and individual display areas for various pieces. But these weren't the kind of artifacts you'd see in any public museum exhibition. Even with my limited knowledge of art and antiquities, I could tell we were looking at items of extraordinary value and questionable provenance. Ancient Greek pottery that looked suspiciously similar to pieces I'd seen in FBI art theft bulletins. Paintings that appeared to be original works by masters whose pieces were supposed to be in major museums or were listed as missing in various international art crime databases. A display case containing what looked like genuine pre-Columbian gold artifacts, the kind that were supposed to be in national museums in Central and South America. Chen was already photographing everything with her phone, standard procedure for potential crime scenes. Dr. Ashford, some of these pieces look familiar. That painting near the Impressionist work with the water lilies, isn't that similar to the Monet that was reported stolen from a private collector in Dallas about 2 years ago? The woman's carefully maintained composure finally began to crack. You don't understand how the art world works, officers. These people, our patrons, they pay extraordinary amounts to experience culture that can't be displayed to the general public. We're not stealing, we're preserving important cultural artifacts for people who can truly appreciate their historical significance. What people? I asked, moving closer to examine a glass case containing what appeared to be ancient Egyptian artifacts, including jewelry and small sculptures that belonged in Cairo's National Museum. Collectors. Wealthy patrons of the arts who understand that some pieces are too valuable, too fragile, too culturally sensitive for general public display. They make significant donations to the museum, donations that keep us operational, and in return, they get private viewings of pieces that exist in complex legal situations. I was beginning to understand the scope of what we'd discovered. You're running a black market art gallery inside a legitimate museum operation. Chin had moved deeper into the room and called me over to a display area near the back wall. You need to see this, she said quietly. Inside a climate-controlled case was a collection of Native American artifacts, pottery, jewelry, ceremonial masks, and what appeared to be sacred ritual items that clearly belonged in tribal museums or should have been repatriated to their communities of origin. These are sacred items, Chin said, her voice tight with controlled anger. She had Cherokee heritage through her grandmother and immediately recognized the cultural significance. These shouldn't be in private hands at all. Some of these pieces look like they should be protected under federal repatriation laws. Dr. Ashford seemed to realize her situation was deteriorating rapidly. Look, officers, you have to understand these are very important people we're talking about. Museum board members, city council members, prominent business leaders, major donors to cultural institutions throughout Texas. This arrangement has been mutually beneficial for everyone involved. The museum gets funding, the artifacts get proper preservation, and people who truly appreciate culture get to experience pieces that would otherwise sit in storage. Except for the people and cultures these items were stolen from, I replied, photographing serial numbers and provenance tags on several pieces. That's when we heard footsteps in the main corridor, heavy, purposeful, and definitely not from museum security. The steps were confident, familiar with the building's layout. Shin and I exchanged glances and instinctively moved toward the entrance, hands positioning near our service weapons. Dr. Ashford. A male voice called from the corridor, the tone carrying authority and mild irritation. Is everything all right? We noticed police vehicles outside when we arrived. A man in his 60s wearing an expensive tailored suit appeared in the doorway, clearly not expecting to find two police officers in the room. Behind him, I could see at least two other well-dressed individuals, one woman in a fur coat despite the March weather, and another man with the bearing of someone accustomed to being the most important person in any room. Gentlemen and lady, the first man said with practiced calm and the kind of confidence that comes from never having been seriously challenged. I'm sure this is simply a misunderstanding. Dr. Ashford, perhaps you could explain to these officers that this is a private exhibition space for museum patrons? Chin stepped forward, her detective badge clearly visible on her belt. Sir, we're investigating a break-in and potential theft of cultural artifacts. I'm going to need to see identification from all of you, and I need to know what you're doing in a secured area of the museum at nearly midnight. The tension in the room escalated immediately. Here we were, two officers who'd responded to what should have been a routine alarm call, now potentially facing several individuals involved in what appeared to be a sophisticated art theft and trafficking operation. The kind of operation that required significant financial resources, political connections, and institutional cooperation. The man who'd spoken first reached slowly into his jacket. Of course, officers. I'm Robert Hennings, chairman of the museum's board of directors. He produced an expensive leather wallet and handed me a business card along with his driver's license. I'm also a member of the Austin City Council and a partner at Hennings, Marshall & Associates law firm. The woman stepped forward next. I'm Victoria Sterling, also a board member and major donor. Her identification showed an address in Westlake Hills, one of Austin's most exclusive neighborhoods. We have a standing arrangement for private viewings of special collections. The second man remained silent, but his expensive clothes and demeanor suggested he was equally prominent in Austin's social hierarchy. This is highly irregular. Hennings continued, his tone shifting toward the authoritative manner of someone accustomed to controlling situations. These are legitimate cultural preservation activities conducted with full knowledge and approval of the museum's administration. Dr. Ashford can confirm that all proper procedures have been followed. I looked at Dr. Ashford, who appeared to be caught between protecting her patrons and dealing with the reality of a police investigation. Dr. Ashford, are you telling us that the museum board officially approved housing what appear to be stolen artifacts for private viewing by wealthy donors? It's more complicated than that, she said weakly. Chin had been quietly photographing the identification documents, and was now examining more of the displayed items. Mr. Hennings, I'm looking at artifacts that appear on several federal databases of stolen cultural property. How do you explain the museum's possession of items that are listed as missing or stolen? The atmosphere in the room had become extremely tense. These were clearly people who expected their social status and wealth to shield them from serious scrutiny. The realization that 2 street cops had stumbled onto their operation and weren't going to be easily dismissed was visibly unsettling them. Officers, Hennings said, his voice taking on a subtle threatening tone, I think you may be misunderstanding the situation here. These are complex matters involving cultural preservation, legitimate collectors, and significant financial contributions to important civic institutions. Perhaps it would be better if you spoke with your supervisors before proceeding further with this investigation. That was when I realized we weren't just looking at art theft. We were looking at a corruption network that potentially involved some of Austin's most powerful people. And they were making it clear that they expected their influence to protect them from consequences. The implications of what we'd discovered would eventually reach the mayor's office, several city council members, and some of the wealthiest families in Texas. But that night, standing in that hidden gallery surrounded by stolen cultural artifacts and facing down people who clearly believed they were above the law, I understood that Chin and I had uncovered something that powerful people had worked very hard to keep secret. What's the most shocking thing you've discovered about someone you thought you knew? Have you ever realized that people in positions of trust and authority might not be who they appear to be? I thought that was the worst corruption case of my career. Then 3 days later, my partner got a call that connected to something even bigger. 3 days after the museum incident, my partner Chen got transferred to the FBI task force investigating the art theft ring. I was assigned a new partner, Detective Marcus Rivera, and we were working day shift patrol when the call that would consume the next 2 months of our lives came through. Unit 47, we have a harassment complaint at 2847 Magnolia Drive in Riverside Heights. Dispatch announced on February 8, 2021. Female caller reports ongoing stalking, requests immediate police response. Rivera and I were cruising in our 2019 Chevrolet Tahoe when the call came in around 2:30 p.m. Riverside Heights was a middle-class neighborhood of tract homes built in the 1990s, the kind of area where the biggest crimes were usually package theft and the occasional domestic dispute. We pulled up to a well-maintained single-story home with a neat front yard and a red Honda Civic in the driveway. Before we could even get out of our vehicle, the front door opened and a woman in her early 30s came rushing toward us. "Thank God you're here," she said breathlessly. "I'm Amanda Lawson. He's been watching me for weeks. I think he's still out there somewhere." Amanda was thin, nervous, and spoke rapidly. She kept glancing around the street as if expecting someone to emerge from behind parked cars or trees. Her hands shook as she gestured toward various points around her property. "Ma'am, let's start from the beginning," Rivera said calmly. "Who exactly has been watching you?" "I don't know his name, but I've seen him multiple times. Tall, maybe 6 feet, wearing a dark baseball cap and gray hoodie. He drives a blue pickup truck, I think it's a Ford, maybe a 2015 or 2016 model. He parks at the end of the street and just sits there watching my house." I took notes while Rivera continued the interview. "When did you first notice this person?" "About 3 weeks ago. I was coming home from work around 6 p.m. and saw him parked across from Mrs. Chen's house at the end of the block. When I looked again 20 minutes later, he was gone. But then I started seeing him more often." "How often?" I asked. "Almost every day. Sometimes in the morning before I leave for work, sometimes when I get home. Last Tuesday, I saw him parked on Elm Street, that's the next block over, and he had binoculars pointed at my house. Rivera and I exchanged glances. Binoculars escalated the situation significantly. Did you get a license plate number? Partial. Texas plates started with GH, but I couldn't see the numbers. I was too scared to get closer. Where do you work, Ms. Lawson? I asked. Riverside Medical Center. I'm a billing coordinator in the business office. I work Monday through Friday, 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. Have you noticed this person near your workplace? Amanda's face went pale. Yes, actually. Last Friday I was leaving work and saw the same blue truck in the hospital parking garage. When I got to my car, he was gone. Rivera was scanning the street while we talked. Ms. Lawson, have you had any recent breakups, workplace conflicts, or issues with neighbors that might explain why someone would be watching you? No, nothing like that. I live alone, I keep to myself mostly. I broke up with my boyfriend about 6 months ago, but that was mutual and he moved to Dallas. This is someone I've never seen before. Have you taken any photos or video of this person? I tried, but he's always too far away, and by the time I get my phone out, he's driving away. But I've been keeping a log. She pulled out a small notebook with dates, times, and descriptions written in neat handwriting. I reviewed her log. The entries went back 3 weeks and showed sightings almost daily, sometimes multiple times per day. Very detailed observations. February 15th, 7:45 a.m., blue Ford pickup, TX plates GH something, parked end of Magnolia Drive, male driver in gray hoodie, left when I came outside to get newspaper. This is very thorough documentation, I said. Have you installed any security cameras? I ordered a doorbell camera last week, but it hasn't arrived yet. I've been afraid to leave the house except for work. Rivera walked the perimeter of her property while I continued taking Amanda's statement. The neighborhood was typical suburban good sight lines, regular street parking, the kind of place where unusual activity would be noticed by neighbors who'd lived there for years. Ms. Lawson, we're going to canvass the neighborhood and talk to your neighbors. Has anyone else mentioned seeing this person or truck? I asked Mrs. Patterson next door, but she hasn't noticed anything unusual. Same with the Johnsons across the street. Rivera returned from his walk around the property. No obvious surveillance positions, no signs of anyone attempting to access the backyard or windows. Ms. Lawson, we're going to patrol this area more frequently, and see if we can spot this individual. What should I do if I see him again? Call 911 immediately, I said. Try to get photos if you can do so safely, but don't approach the vehicle or try to confront this person. We left Amanda our contact information and assured her we'd take her complaint seriously. Rivera and I spent the next hour driving around the neighborhood, looking for blue pickup trucks and talking to neighbors. Nobody else had noticed anything unusual. What do you think? Rivera asked as we completed our patrol. Either she's got a legitimate stalker who's very good at staying hidden, or she's genuinely paranoid about something that isn't actually happening. Over the next 2 weeks, Amanda called our department 11 times reporting sightings of the blue pickup truck. Every time we responded, we found no evidence of anyone watching her house. We checked traffic cameras, talked to more neighbors, and even staked out her street on several occasions. The reports became more detailed and more frequent. Amanda claimed the stalker was now following her to grocery stores, restaurants, even to church on Sundays. She provided descriptions of different vehicles the blue pickup, but also a gray sedan and a white van that she believed were part of some kind of surveillance team. He's getting bolder, she told me during our third visit to her house. Yesterday I saw him at the coffee shop on Central Avenue. He was sitting at a corner table wearing sunglasses, pretending to read a newspaper. Did you point him out to the staff? By the time I worked up the courage to say something, he was gone. But the barista said a man matching that description had been coming in regularly for months. He's been watching me longer than I thought. Rivera and I requested the coffee shop's security footage. The timestamps Amanda provided showed normal customer activity, but no one matching her description of the stalker. The barista confirmed that no one had been asking about Amanda or acting suspiciously. The fourth week brought a significant escalation. Amanda called 911 at 3:17 a.m. claiming someone was trying to break into her house. "He's in my backyard," she whispered into the phone. "I can see a flashlight moving around back there. Please hurry." Rivera and I responded with backup units, surrounding the property with our flashlights and service weapons drawn. We found no evidence of anyone attempting to enter the home, no footprints in the soft dirt around the foundation, no tool marks on windows or doors, no disturbed vegetation. "I know what I saw," Amanda insisted. "Someone was back there for at least 10 minutes. The pattern continued for another month. Amanda's reports became increasingly elaborate and detailed, but we never found corroborating evidence. No neighbors saw anything. No security cameras captured suspicious activity. No physical evidence supported her claims. The breakthrough came during our 5th visit to her house, when Amanda mentioned something that made Rivera and I exchange looks. "I think he knows my work schedule because he's always gone when I call you during business hours, but he shows up right after I get home." "Ms. Lawson," Rivera said carefully, "we've responded to calls during your work hours. You called us from your office 3 times last week." Amanda paused, confusion crossing her face. "No, that's not right. I only call when I'm at home." I checked my notes. "Ma'am, you called Tuesday at 10:15 a.m. saying you saw the blue pickup from your office window. You called Wednesday at 2:30 p.m. from the hospital parking garage." I don't remember calling from work." That evening, Rivera and I reviewed all our reports and Amanda's call logs with our supervisor, Sergeant Williams. The pattern was becoming clear. Amanda was making reports that contradicted each other, claiming to see her stalker in multiple locations simultaneously, and apparently not remembering some of her own calls to police. "I think we're dealing with someone having a psychological episode," Sergeant Williams concluded. "But we can't just dismiss her calls. If there's really someone stalking her, and we miss it because we assume she's delusional, that's a lawsuit and a potential tragedy." The situation reached a crisis point on March 18th when Amanda called 911 claiming her stalker had left a threatening note on her car windshield. "It says he knows where I work and where I live," she told the dispatcher. "It says he's going to make me pay for ignoring him." Rivera and I responded immediately. Amanda met us in her driveway, holding a piece of paper that appeared to be torn from a notebook. The message was written in block letters with a black marker. "You can't hide from me forever." "When did you find this?" I asked. "About an hour ago when I came home from the grocery store." I examined the note carefully. The handwriting looked familiar, though I couldn't immediately place why. The paper was standard notebook paper, the kind you could buy at any office supply store. "Miss Lawson, we're going to have this analyzed for fingerprints and handwriting. In the meantime, is there somewhere you could stay? Maybe with family or friends. I don't want to put anyone else in danger. What if he follows me?" Rivera was examining her car for signs of tampering. No scratches on the vehicle, no damage to suggest someone forced their way to leave this note. We dusted the note for fingerprints and found only Amanda's prints and one partial print that turned out to belong to me from handling the evidence. The handwriting analysis took 2 weeks to complete. The results were conclusive but disturbing. The note had been written by Amanda herself. When we confronted her with the evidence, Amanda broke down completely. "I didn't write that note. Someone must have copied my handwriting. He's been studying me, learning everything about me." "Ms. Lawson," Rivera said gently, "we think you need to speak with someone who can help you work through what you've been experiencing. You don't believe me either." "No one believes me. That's exactly what he wants, for everyone to think I'm crazy so he can do whatever he wants." We connected Amanda with the county's crisis intervention team and a mental health counselor. Over the following weeks, with proper treatment and medication, Amanda's reports of being stalked stopped completely. She later admitted that she had no clear memory of writing the threatening note, and acknowledged that she might have been experiencing symptoms that weren't based in reality. The case taught me that sometimes the most dangerous situations aren't the obvious ones. Amanda genuinely believed she was being stalked and was terrified for her safety. Her fear was real even if the threat wasn't. And for 2 months, she consumed significant police resources and created genuine concern among her neighbors and family members. But here's what still bothers me about the case. Amanda was an intelligent, educated woman with no history of mental illness. The psychological break seemed to come out of nowhere and resolved relatively quickly with treatment. It made me wonder what kind of stress or trauma might trigger that kind of break from reality in otherwise normal people. Have you ever been convinced something was happening that others couldn't see? What would you do if someone you cared about was reporting threats that you couldn't verify but they clearly believed were real? What I didn't know was that Amanda's case was just the beginning of a pattern that would emerge across our entire district. 5 days after Amanda Lawson's case was resolved, we got a call that initially seemed unrelated but would prove to be part of a disturbing pattern emerging across our district. I was partnered with Detective Rivera in our 2020 Ford Police Interceptor when dispatch sent us to 1834 Willow Court in Cedar Falls on March 23, 2021, around 3:30 p.m. on what started as a routine Tuesday afternoon. Unit 47, we have a suspicious person report. Caller states male subject has been conducting surveillance of multiple residences on Willow Court for several weeks. Complainant requests immediate police response. The call came from Mrs. Dorothy Martinez, a retired elementary school teacher who'd lived in the Cedar Falls neighborhood for 15 years. When Rivera and I arrived at her modest ranch-style home, she was waiting anxiously on her front porch, clearly agitated and relieved to see us. "Officers, thank God you're here. I've been trying to decide whether to call for weeks, but this situation is getting worse every day. It's the man in the house across the street, 1837 Willow Court. He's been watching all the houses on this block with binoculars, taking detailed notes, acting very suspicious. My neighbors are starting to get really uncomfortable." Rivera and I looked across the street at a modest 2-story colonial-style home with beige siding and a well-maintained front yard. A dark green 2017 Nissan Altima with Texas plates sat in the driveway. From the outside, the house appeared completely normal, nothing that would indicate unusual activity. "How long has this been going on, Mrs. Martinez?" I asked, taking out my notepad. "About 3 weeks now, maybe a little longer. At first I thought maybe he was a new neighbor getting familiar with the area. You know how people sometimes like to observe their surroundings when they move somewhere new. But his behavior has become increasingly strange and frankly quite disturbing." "What specific behavior concerns you?" "Every single morning, usually around 7 a.m., he positions himself at his front window with a pair of large binoculars, the kind hunters use. He systematically watches different houses on this block for hours at a time, and he writes everything down in notebooks. I've seen him with at least 3 different notebooks." Rivera was examining the street layout and sight lines. "What exactly have you observed him watching?" "Well, that's what's really strange. He spends most of his time focused on the Peterson house at 1829 that's been completely empty for 2 months since they moved to Florida for retirement. Then he watches the old Johnson place at 1841. That house has been vacant for over a year since Mrs. Johnson passed away. But he also watches the occupied houses, which is what really concerns me and my neighbors." I made detailed notes of the addresses she mentioned. "Does he watch your house specifically?" "Yes, absolutely. And the Garcia's house next door to me, and the Smith's place at the end of the block. But here's what I find most bizarre: he seems most intensely interested in the empty houses. Sometimes I see him walking around those vacant properties after dark with a powerful flashlight, like he's looking for something or someone. Have you tried approaching him directly?" Mrs. Martinez nodded vigorously. "I went over there last week to introduce myself, thinking maybe he was just a concerned neighbor or maybe had some legitimate reason for his behavior. The man who answered the door was polite enough, but extremely nervous and jittery. Said his name was David Thompson and that he'd recently moved into the rental house. But officers, here's the really strange part: throughout our entire conversation, he kept looking past me at the houses behind me, like he was studying them even while we were talking. It was very uncomfortable. Rivera and I decided we needed to approach David Thompson directly to get his side of the story. As we walked across the street, I noticed that the front window of his house had heavy dark curtains, but there was a narrow gap where someone could observe the street without being easily seen from outside. David Thompson answered the door on our second knock. He was a thin man in his early 40s with prematurely graying hair and extremely nervous mannerisms, constantly fidgeting with his hands and shifting his weight from foot to foot. Most noticeably, his eyes constantly darted to the houses behind us as we spoke, just as Mrs. Martinez had described. "Mr. Thompson, I'm Detective Rivera. This is Detective Williams with Austin PD. We're following up on reports of suspicious activity in the neighborhood and wanted to speak with you." "Suspicious activity? I haven't seen anything suspicious from the neighbors, if that's what you mean." He paused, his eyes scanning the street behind us again. "Although, now that you mention it, there has been some very unusual and concerning movement in the empty houses that I think you should know about." "What kind of movement?" I asked. "The Peterson House, 1829 Willow Court. Over the past 3 weeks, I've observed lights on inside the house during nighttime hours, distinct shadows moving past the windows, and what appears to be people entering and leaving through the back door. But according to the neighbors, that house is supposed to be completely vacant. Same pattern with the Johnson House at 1841. Someone's been going in and out of there on a regular basis." Rivera and I exchanged concerned glances. If there was unauthorized access to vacant properties, that could indicate squatters, drug activity, or theft. "Mr. Thompson, when exactly did you move to this address?" "About 5 weeks ago. I specifically chose this location because I needed a quiet place with good visibility to keep an eye on things in the neighborhood." "Keep an eye on what specific things?" David's demeanor became noticeably more agitated, and he stepped partially outside his door to get a better view of the street. "The illegal activities that are clearly taking place in those vacant houses. People using empty homes for drug manufacturing operations, squatters who might be dangerous, possibly human trafficking operations. I've been systematically documenting everything I've observed." "Have you actually seen people entering these houses?" "Not directly entering, no, but I've definitely seen the evidence of unauthorized occupation. Lights moving from room to room, distinct shadows of multiple people, and sometimes I can hear voices coming from inside. Last Tuesday night around 2 a.m., I observed someone with a powerful flashlight conducting what appeared to be a systematic search inside the Peterson house." "Did you call police to report this suspicious activity when you first observed it?" "I wanted to gather comprehensive evidence first before making any official reports. I've been taking detailed photographs, maintaining careful logs of all the suspicious activity, and trying to establish patterns that would help law enforcement understand the scope of what appears to be an organized criminal operation." David invited us inside to show us his extensive documentation, and what we saw was both impressive and concerning. The interior of the house was very sparse, minimal furniture, no personal decorations or family photos, but elaborate surveillance equipment positioned at multiple windows facing the street. He had professional-grade binoculars, a camera with an expensive telephoto lens, and numerous notebooks filled with extremely detailed observations written in small, precise handwriting. "Here's my comprehensive log from last week," he said, opening one of several thick notebooks. "Monday, March 15th, 11:47 p.m., lights observed moving systematically through second-floor windows of 1829 Willow Court. Duration approximately 15 minutes. Tuesday, March 16th, 2:15 a.m., movement detected in backyard area of 1841 Willow Court, appeared to be multiple individuals. Wednesday, March 17th, 9:30 p.m., unidentified vehicle observed parked behind 1829 Willow Court for approximately 30 minutes, occupants unknown." Rivera examined the photographs David had taken with his telephoto lens. They showed the empty houses at various times of day and night, but the images were taken from a considerable distance with poor lighting conditions. I couldn't make out any clear evidence of people, unauthorized vehicles, or criminal activity in any of the photos. Mr. Thompson, have you contacted the property owners or real estate agents who are handling these vacant homes to ask about authorized access? Absolutely not. I don't want to alert anyone until I have concrete, undeniable proof of what's happening. If there's organized criminal activity taking place, the property owners or their agents might be directly involved in facilitating it. What makes you think the owners might be involved? Think about it logically, officers. How else would multiple people be gaining regular access to these supposedly vacant houses? They either have keys, alarm codes, or some kind of inside access. This has to be a well-organized operation using vacant properties as bases for illegal activities. I walked over to his front window and looked across at the Peterson house through his binoculars. From this angle and distance, the house appeared completely dark and undisturbed. No signs of recent activity, no vehicle tracks in the gravel driveway, no footprints visible in the flower beds around the foundation. Mr. Thompson, would you be willing to accompany us to these properties so you can show us exactly where you've observed this suspicious activity? Of course, officers. But we should be very careful about our approach. If they have lookouts or surveillance of their own, they might see us investigating and either flee or escalate their criminal activities. We walked across the street to 1829 Willow Court, the Peterson house that David claimed showed the most activity. He pointed to various windows where he said he'd seen lights and movement, describing specific patterns and time frames. The house appeared to be a standard two-story suburban home with a realtor's lockbox hanging on the front door handle, but the lockbox appeared completely undisturbed. Rivera contacted the listing agent whose information was on the for sale sign in the front yard. Janet Williams from Riverside Realty arrived at the property within 30 minutes, apologizing for the delay. I personally check on this house twice a week as part of my standard procedure for vacant listings. She explained as she unlocked the front door using her key from the lockbox. The utilities have been turned off except for basic electrical service to maintain the security system. Absolutely no one should be inside this house without my direct authorization. We conducted a thorough walkthrough of the completely empty house, checking every room, closet, basement, and attic space. No signs of unauthorized entry, no evidence of recent occupancy, no damage or disturbance of any kind. The house was spotlessly clean and showed absolutely no signs of the extensive activity David had described in his detailed logs. When was the last time you were physically inside this property? Rivera asked Janet. 2 days ago, Monday afternoon. I do a complete inspection every Monday and Thursday. Everything was exactly as it is right now, completely vacant, clean, and secure. We repeated the same process at 1841 Willow Court, the Johnson house. The property manager, Tom Bradley from Century Property Management, met us there and confirmed that the house had been empty for over 13 months since Mrs. Johnson's death, and that he personally inspected the property every week for insurance and security purposes. Again, we found absolutely no evidence of any unauthorized activity. Mr. Thompson, I said when we returned to his house after completing both inspections, we've thoroughly examined both properties with the authorized agents, and we found no evidence whatsoever of the criminal activity you've described in your reports. That just proves how sophisticated and careful they are, officers. They obviously have advanced warning systems and know exactly when official inspections are scheduled. They probably have lookouts and know when law enforcement is coming to investigate. Who exactly are they in your opinion? The criminal organization that's using these vacant houses as operational bases. They're clearly very well organized and professional. They wouldn't leave obvious evidence that could be easily discovered during routine inspections. Rivera and I spent another 90 minutes with David, carefully reviewing his extensive logs and examining all of his photographs. The pattern was remarkably similar to Amanda Lawson's case from the previous week. Extremely detailed documentation of suspicious activity that we couldn't verify through any independent means, elaborate theories about organized criminal behavior, and an unshakable conviction that something sinister was happening despite complete lack of corroborating evidence. Mr. Thompson, approximately how many hours per day would you estimate that you spend conducting this surveillance of the neighborhood? It varies depending on the level of activity I observe, but typically between 8 and 12 hours daily. This is critically important work, Officers, someone needs to be systematically monitoring these properties to protect the neighborhood from criminal infiltration. Do you currently have employment or other daily responsibilities? I'm between positions right now after being laid off from my accounting job. This surveillance and documentation work has become my full-time priority until law enforcement can take appropriate action. That evening, Rivera and I conducted background research on David Thompson. He'd been laid off from his position as a senior accountant at a mid-sized firm 6 months earlier due to company downsizing. He'd also gone through a contentious divorce that had been finalized 4 months ago, losing his house in the settlement. Since then, he'd been living in a series of short-term rentals. His previous landlord had actually evicted him after 2 months due to complaints from neighbors about his unusual surveillance behavior and paranoid accusations against other tenants. Exact same pattern as Amanda Lawson, Rivera observed as we reviewed the information. Intelligent, educated person dealing with recent major life stressors, job loss, relationship failure, housing instability, who's developing elaborate paranoid theories to explain perceived threats. Over the following 3 weeks, we received 8 additional calls about David Thompson from various neighbors on Willow Court. Mrs. Garcia reported him walking around the empty houses with flashlights and taking extensive photographs. Mr. Smith called to complain that David had been taking pictures of his occupied house and writing down his family's daily schedule. The Hendersons were concerned because David had approached their teenage daughter asking detailed questions about unusual activity she might have observed in the neighborhood. The situation reached a critical point when David called 911 on April 15 at 10:47 p.m., claiming he was witnessing a major criminal operation in progress at the Peterson house. There are at least 6 to 8 individuals inside the house right now, he told the emergency dispatcher with obvious excitement. They have equipment, large bags that could contain drugs or weapons, and they're using vehicles with no license plates. This is exactly what I'd been documenting and warning about for weeks. Rivera and I responded immediately with 3 backup units, prepared for a potential drug manufacturing operation, theft ring, or armed break-in situation. We surrounded the Peterson house with our flashlights and service weapons drawn, ready for a serious criminal confrontation. We found the Peterson house in exactly the same condition as it had been during our previous 2 inspections, completely empty, with no signs of recent activity, no vehicles, no equipment, and no evidence that anyone had been inside. David was standing in his front yard with his binoculars and camera, insisting that we'd missed the criminals by only minutes and that they must have been monitoring police radio frequencies. They saw the patrol cars coming and escaped through the back door, he insisted, showing us blurry photographs he'd taken. But I have photographic evidence of them entering the house and carrying equipment inside. The photographs showed nothing but indistinct shadows and poor lighting around the empty house, with no clear images of people, vehicles, or suspicious activity. After this incident, we arranged for David to speak with Dr. Sarah Chin, a crisis intervention specialist with the county mental health department. During his evaluation, he gradually admitted that he'd been under tremendous psychological stress since losing his job, his marriage, and his home, and that he'd been having significant trouble sleeping, eating regularly, and maintaining normal social relationships. I know it probably sounds crazy to other people, but I can see things happening that others can't see, he told Dr. Chin during their session. Maybe it's because I'm more observant and analytical than most people, or maybe I'm seeing things that aren't really there. But the fear feels completely real. With appropriate mental health treatment, medication, and counseling, David's reports of criminal activity in the empty houses stopped entirely. He eventually moved to San Antonio to live with his sister and brother-in-law while he worked on rebuilding his life and career. But the case raised disturbing questions about how social isolation, economic stress, and psychological trauma can create elaborate false realities that feel completely convincing to the person experiencing them. David had spent months systematically documenting criminal activity that existed only in his mind, consuming significant police resources and creating genuine fear and tension throughout his neighborhood. The most unsettling aspect of his case was how absolutely convinced he'd been that he was performing an essential public service by protecting his community from a real and dangerous criminal threat. His dedication to surveillance and documentation showed genuine concern for neighborhood safety and security, even though the danger was entirely imaginary. Have you ever been so completely convinced of something that you couldn't accept contradictory evidence? What do you think causes otherwise rational people to create elaborate explanations for things that might have much simpler explanations? What we didn't realize at the time was that David's case and Amanda's were just the beginning of something much larger. Multiple people across our district were developing similar paranoid delusions, and we were about to discover the disturbing connection that linked them all. 2 weeks after David Thompson's case was resolved, Detective Rivera and I got called to investigate what would become the most disturbing case in the series. On April 3, 2021, we received a complaint that seemed routine but revealed something far more sinister than we'd encountered before. Unit 47, we have a business licensing complaint at 3456 Oak Street in Brookside. Caller reports suspicious activity at newly opened restaurant. Rivera and I were patrolling in our 2021 Dodge Charger when the call came in around 11:30 a.m. Oak Street was a mixed commercial and residential area, the kind of neighborhood where small restaurants and local businesses served the surrounding community. We pulled up to Miller's Family Diner, a converted house that had been transformed into a restaurant about 2 months earlier. The exterior looked normal, freshly painted white siding, a small parking lot, and a modest sign advertising home cooking and daily specials. But something felt off immediately. The complainant was Robert Chen, who owned Chen's hardware store 3 blocks away. He'd been in the neighborhood for 12 years and knew the local business patterns well. "Officers, I've been watching this place since it opened, and something isn't right," he said, meeting us in the parking lot. "They claim to be a restaurant, but I've never seen more than 3 or 4 customers at any time. Yet they're always busy inside, and there's constantly people coming and going who don't look like they're there to eat." I examined the restaurant's exterior. The windows were tinted darker than typical for a family restaurant, making it difficult to see inside clearly. There were several vehicles in the parking lot: a white Ford Transit van, 2 sedans, and a pickup truck, but no obvious signs of typical restaurant activity. "What kind of people have you seen coming and going?" Rivera asked. "Business types, people with clipboards and cameras, folks who stay for maybe 20 minutes and leave. And here's the weird part: they've been asking questions around the neighborhood about residents, how long people have lived here, what their daily routines are like." "Who's been asking these questions?" "People who say they work for the restaurant, doing community outreach and customer research. But the questions are strange. They want to know about people's work schedules, when they're home, what cars they drive. Doesn't sound like normal restaurant market research." Rivera and I decided to visit the restaurant directly. The interior was set up like a typical diner: booths, counter seating, and a kitchen area. But several details seemed wrong. Only 4 tables were occupied, but I could hear multiple conversations and activity coming from what appeared to be back rooms. A middle-aged woman approached us with menus. "Welcome to Miller's. Table for 2? "Actually, we're with Austin PD," I said, showing my badge. "We're following up on some questions about your business operations." Her demeanor changed immediately. "Is there a problem, officers? We've received reports about people associated with your restaurant asking detailed questions about neighborhood residents. Can you explain what kind of community outreach you're conducting? We're just trying to understand our customer base and community needs. Standard business practice." "What's your name, ma'am?" "Linda Miller. I'm the manager." Rivera was observing the restaurant layout. "Ms. Miller, could we speak with the owner about your community research activities? He's not available right now. Is there something specific you need to know?" That's when I noticed something unusual. The customers at the occupied tables weren't eating. They had notebooks, cameras, and what looked like monitoring equipment. None of them had food in front of them. "Ms. Miller, are those customers or employees?" Before she could answer, a man emerged from a back room carrying a laptop and a folder full of photographs. He saw us and immediately tried to retreat, but Rivera called out to him. "Sir, we're police officers. Could we speak with you for a moment?" The man reluctantly approached. "I'm just a contractor working on some projects for the restaurant." "What kind of projects?" "Market research, community analysis, that sort of thing." I asked to see his identification. His driver's license showed the name Marcus Webb, but when I ran his information through our system, it came back with an interesting result. He was a private investigator with a license that had been suspended 6 months earlier for unauthorized surveillance activities. "Mr. Webb, your PI license is suspended. What kind of surveillance work are you conducting here?" "It's not surveillance, it's legitimate business research." Rivera had been examining the materials on the tables. "This looks like detailed surveillance reports on neighborhood residents. Names, addresses, daily schedules, vehicle information, family details." Linda Miller tried to intervene. "Officers, I think there's been a misunderstanding. We're just trying to understand our community. Ma'am, this appears to be a systematic surveillance operation targeting private citizens. We need to see your business license and permits." That's when the situation took a dramatic turn. Linda Miller admitted they didn't have a valid restaurant license. The diner was a front operation for a private investigation company that had been contracted to conduct detailed surveillance on the Brookside neighborhood residents. "Who contracted you to conduct this surveillance?" I asked. "We can't reveal client information. It's confidential." Rivera and I requested backup and began a more thorough investigation of the premises. In the back rooms, we found extensive surveillance equipment, detailed files on over 40 neighborhood residents, photographs taken with telephoto lenses, and documents that appeared to be psychological profiles of local families. The surveillance reports were incredibly detailed: work schedules, shopping patterns, family relationships, financial information, and even personal habits like exercise routines and social activities. They had been systematically documenting the lives of everyone in the surrounding 6-block area. "This is stalking on an industrial scale," Rivera observed, reviewing the files. "We discovered that the operation had been running for 3 months, with the fake restaurant serving as a base for teams of investigators who conducted daily surveillance of the neighborhood. They had been using the dining room as a staging area and the back rooms as data processing centers. The most disturbing aspect was the psychological profiles they'd developed. Each resident had been categorized based on their vulnerability to various types of manipulation or influence. Some were labeled as potential security risks, others as financially vulnerable, and some as socially isolated. Who authorized this level of surveillance on private citizens?" I demanded. Linda Miller finally revealed that they'd been contracted by a property development company planning to purchase multiple properties in the neighborhood. The surveillance was designed to identify which residents might be most likely to sell their homes and which might resist development pressure. They wanted detailed information about every family so they could develop targeted approaches for property acquisition. She explained. The development company, Brookside Holdings LLC, had been planning to buy out the entire neighborhood for a commercial development project. They'd hired the surveillance operation to gather intelligence that would help them identify the most effective pressure points for each property owner. Some residents were targeted for financial pressure, others for social pressure, and some were identified as potential obstacles who might organize community resistance. Marcus Webb admitted during his interview. We also discovered that the surveillance operation had been coordinating with other fake businesses in the area. Market research company that had been conducting phone surveys and a community improvement group that had been going door to door asking invasive questions about residents' personal lives. The psychological profiles included disturbing details about residents' mental health, family problems, financial difficulties, and personal vulnerabilities. They'd been using this information to develop manipulation strategies designed to pressure people into selling their properties below market value. They knew which families were having marriage problems, who was struggling financially, who had health issues, and who might be susceptible to intimidation. Rivera said, reviewing the files. We arrested Linda Miller and Marcus Webb on charges of conducting unlicensed surveillance, stalking, and operating a fraudulent business. The investigation revealed that similar operations had been established in 3 other Austin neighborhoods, all targeting communities that development companies wanted to acquire. The case exposed a sophisticated corporate espionage operation that had been systematically violating the privacy of hundreds of families. The surveillance had been so detailed and invasive that it amounted to psychological warfare against entire communities. District Attorney Patricia Hernandez later described it as one of the most extensive privacy violations we've seen in Travis County. These companies were essentially conducting military-style intelligence operations against ordinary families. The Brookside Holdings development project was permanently canceled, and several executives faced federal charges for conspiracy and violation of privacy rights. The fake restaurant and associated front operations were shut down, but the psychological damage to the community took months to repair. Many residents reported feeling violated and unsafe in their own homes after learning about the extent of surveillance they'd been subjected to. Some families moved away, unable to cope with the knowledge that their most private moments had been documented and analyzed. The case taught us that corporate crime can be just as invasive and psychologically damaging as individual stalking. When powerful organizations decide to target ordinary citizens, they have resources and capabilities that can devastate entire communities. It also revealed how easily fake businesses can be established to conduct surveillance operations right under the noses of law enforcement and community members. The restaurant had seemed completely legitimate to casual observers. Have you ever noticed businesses in your neighborhood that seemed to have very few customers but stayed open anyway? What would you do if you discovered that your daily routines had been systematically documented and analyzed by strangers? But the most disturbing aspect of this case wasn't the surveillance itself, it was discovering that the same psychological manipulation techniques were being used to trigger paranoid episodes in vulnerable individuals like Amanda and David. Thanks so much for watching. I can't express enough how much your support means. The likes, the comments, it all really helps the channel grow. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to hit that like button and share your thoughts in the comments below. I always take the time to read them. And don't forget to subscribe so you never miss out on any new videos. See you next time.